Hello everyone and welcome to Sinful Gaming. I hope you're all doing well, I hope you're all staying safe, and most of all, I hope you're all fighting that war against the Grey. Today we're going to be doing a little review on my experiences and my weekend at SAGT. SAGT is known as South Australian Grand Tournament and it's a tournament that happened here in South Australia, as you might expect by the name of the tournament. It's run by Mike from Doom and Darkness, and so we're going to get into talking a little bit about it in this video. But to start with, let's start explaining exactly what this tournament was all about. So for starters, it was a 2,000 point match play game with 5 games over 2 days across the weekend. We played 3 games on the Saturday and 2 games on the Sunday. The scenarios that we played were Total Conquest, shifting objectives, forcing the hand, the blade's edge, and focal points. We'll get talking about all these scenarios as we go through all my rounds and all that sort of stuff. There were 44 players at this event and it was held at the local RSL in Hilton. There are no secondary objectives and no realms being used, so this means that there were no minor or victories or losses within the event, only draws, major wins, and major losses. Scoring for the event was a mixture of battle points plus victory points. So for instance, a major victory got you 100 battle points, and then you added your victory points on top of that to give you your score for that round. So if you scored 22 victory points and you got a major victory, you would get 122 points for that round. Now that we've got all of that out of the way, we're going to get talking a little bit about my list, but for a more detailed look at my list, you can go back to my previous video of my list sort of tech talking video, which I will link in the description of the video to give you a better chat about everything I plan to do with the list. So here's the list I took. I played Stormcast Eternals in the Stormkeep from Broken Realms Marathi. I also played the Astral Templars subfaction. I took a Lord Castellan as my general. The command trait was Dauntless Hunters, and he had the artifact Godbeast plate. Both of those are the ones that have to be taken by Astral Templars. I then had another Lord Castellan, a Lord Veritant with the Divine Light, Prayer, Artifact Lantern of the Tempest, 2 units of 30 Liberators, full allotment of Grand Hammers and Shields on both the unit, 10 Freeguild Guard, they had Swords and Shields, 2 units of 3 Aether Wings, 12 Gryph-hounds, 9 K-Knight Shadowstalkers as allies, and a Stormkeep Patrol Battalion with an extra command point. This is the list I took in the end, all painted up as you can see there in the picture, and it was a ton of fun to play. I really enjoyed the list, and honestly I don't think there's much I'd change with the list, maybe some tactical errors along the way for me, as we'll talk about later in a few of the games, but I really did enjoy how the list played. It played exactly how I wanted it to, and I think I'm done with playing it now though. So let's go talk about the games and rounds. So my first game was against Jasper Winick with his Skaven Tide, or rather Skaven Moulder as his proper allegiance. He had a Master Moulder with the Rabid Crown, Master Moulder with Foulhide. He had Thanquol on Bone Ripper, who was his general, 4 Warpfire Braziers on the model there, and the Death Frenzy spell. He then had 10 Giant Rats, 4 Rat Ogres, 8 Rat Ogres, 8 Rat Ogres, 3 Packmasters, a Hell Pit, and all wrapped up in that Flesh Meld Menagerie. He was also at 1990 points. He did have an extra command point thanks to his battalion, and he was a nice modest 131 wounds. So, at the start of the game, I sort of reset up all my stuff on the table and pretty much took control of the majority of the board. I took 3 objectives under control, being able to place the Veritant in the middle of the board and just screen out and take at least decent portions of the objectives. I was lucky that I drew an army that was so light on bodies, which sounds weird to say about a Skaven army, but because it was, I was able to only need to put just a few Liberators on each objective, and when the Rat Ogres actually ended up charging my lines on the 2 flanks of the Liberator units, I was able to pile in more models onto the objectives, ensuring they never got them. The Rat Ogres eventually started doing some serious damage, especially with Thanquol on one side of the board. He was on my top right corner, so the objective that was actually on, I guess, Jasper's side of the table. Thanquol came in crashing into that unit and actually rather did some damage. He was killing at least a couple of Liberators, but the Rat Ogres just were barely doing anything to my Liberators as they managed to get all their buffs up early. Thanquol then unluckily rolled a 13 for a spell and did D6 mortal wounds to him, being a 6 and then only managing to pass 1, put himself down to a single wound remaining, and the Grand Hammers went to work on the Rat Lord, taking him down the following combat phase. It was, I mean, that's Skaven. Skaven are going to do stuff with their blow up. But what was cool is, while it was quite a convincing win for my Stormcast in the end, I was really happy that Jasper got to do stuff with his army. He brought back, I think, Rat Ogre units 3 times during our game, only failed 1 roll the whole game, which was cool. Like, I'm happy that we both got to play a nice fun game. He got to do the thing his army does, and my army got to do the thing my army does. Just happens that I guess pre-game move, he was just unable to chew through my troops in time. He just didn't have the damage output required, nor the mortal wounds. And that sort of brings me talking about Thankwell. When I first read that I was going to be playing his list in the first turn, I was actually really worried, thinking I'm like, oh no, Thankwell, those warp fire throwers are going to be damaging. But then realizing he had the braziers, I was a little bit less worried, though Ren 2 is certainly something I still have to worry about. The Hell Pit came in, and he really didn't do that much all game. He failed a charge and was outside of range of any characters, which really hurt in one of the early turns, and thus meant I just was able to rack up those points really quickly. Because I was just able to get the points on the board, it just became a point where Jasper just couldn't catch up, and I even managed to get a sneaky charge with the K-Knight Shadowstalkers, as he had to bring his backfield into the game and push them into his backline, charging a character and capping his objective for just those few extra points. I guess the downside of this game was that I won quite convincingly, and I was going right to the top tables. And this would be, I guess, a common thing for the game. What I found throughout the entire tournament was that my Stormcast list would do really well, and it was just almost, I would say, unbeatable by the mid to low tier armies, but it really didn't have much to deal with the higher ranked armies. So we'll get talking more about that as we look into the next game. I guess one last thing to mention about this particular scenario is Total Conquest gives you extra points for your characters being on the objective. What I was able to do, thanks to the command trait given to me by the Astral Templars, I was able to move those Castellans up early game and managed to get them on the objectives to get the points along with their Liberator blobs. I was then able to run the Varison back, and he capped my home objective, meaning I was generating 6 points a turn that Jasper just couldn't stop me getting. Game 2 was against Sam Morgan and his Grand Alliance Death List, and this list is probably the coolest thing I saw all weekend. It's amazing what you can do with some of the Grand Alliance things, and Smorgan is a fantastic list builder and an absolute gent to play. Really enjoyed our games. I've known Smorgan for quite a while now, and it was good to actually get a game in, and this was something that was, I guess, a bit of a common theme, is people I've talked to a lot, met at other events or been talking to online a lot, or seen communicating a lot online. I managed to get some games into. So, played Smorgan for the first time. Here, he was taking Grand Alliance Death. He had a Guardian of Souls with Nightmare Lantern, who was his general, command trait Master of Black Arts, and the artifact Close to Mist and Shadows. What this allowed him to do is redeploy his general every combat phase, regardless of whether he's in combat or not. He then had a Knight of Shrouds with the Ethereal Steed and the artifact Ring of Immortality, a Vampire Lord on a Nightmare, a Necromancer with a Blade of Dark Summons. He then had 3 times 10 zombies as his battle line, 20 Hexwraith, 5 Hexwraiths, 20 Bladeguard Revenants, 5 Bladeguard Revenants, the Dolores Guard and Shroud Guard battalions coming in at 1990, 2 extra command points, and a nice 126 wounds. This army was really cool. I think the main thing this army sort of does is it has these 2 big units, either Hexwraiths or Bladegeist Revenants, and he has these ton of buffs coming out of the characters. He can either flip onto either unit and sort of stack them up and make which unit he needs to be killy. What's also great is both these units are ridiculously hard to put down. 20 Hexwraiths is no mean feat, same as 20 Bladeguard Revenants. There's just a lot of models to take down and take out of the fight in this army. In the end, I think this game came down really to one poor mistake on my first turn, is where I left one of my flanks exposed, didn't put the prayer on them, and he came in with those Hexwraiths and just mortal wounded a majority of one of my Liberator blobs early game. This really put me on the back foot, though we did have to play out the game for quite a bit of time, priorities coming into it, but in the end he stealed the game with a good double turn, which, you know, it is what it is, and I just couldn't come back from that point onwards. I tried to make a cool little couple of plays in the end of the game, trying to get my K-Knight Shadowstalkers to make some late game charges, but they unfortunately failed those charges. I just made a bit of a mistake in the start of the game, and I wasn't able to recover from it. He punished my mistake, as all good players will, and that was that. It was an interesting game. The objective really didn't land in any favourable position for anyone for too long. It really did sort of spread out, which is nice. But it is what it is. He managed to take down one of my Liberator blobs, and the Bladegeist on the other side were slowly whittling down the other, but because they're tied up in combat and they don't really have that much maneuverability, I wasn't able to go and cap points anywhere else on the table. I sort of, with this scenario, have to sort of pick 2 of the objectives and, well, hope it lands there early for me to get those points early in the game. But on to the next game. Next up in game 3, this is what I was saying. I won that first game really hard, so I was currently the top 1-1 which meant I went into a game against another good player in Liam Burnett Blue, Shadowhammer as he's known on Twitter. You might have seen him pop up on AOS Coach from time to time. I played his Daughters of Cain. He was playing in Keltnar. He had on Malusai Ironscale as his general. Hag Queen in there as well, Morathi Cain and the Shadow Queen, of course. 20 Blood Sisters, 15 Blood Stalkers, 10 Sisters of Slaughter. And then he all had that wrapped up in the Viperic Guard. 2,000 points on the nose. He had an extra command point in there and 109 wounds. So it was pretty light on wounds. However, what happened in this game, once again, I just made a really bad mistake turn 1 that I couldn't come back from. I will say I made a complete mistake. Should have read his list before. I would have known exactly what I was versing. But I saw the hair that he's done, and he swapped the heads out of the masks of the Sisters of Slaughter, and I completely thought they were witch elves. If I had known, had listened, had remembered, I would have known they were Sisters of Slaughter. Completely my own fault here. And I moved the Griffhounds down, thinking I was being nice and sneaky, and then he did his little 6-inch pile-in, capped the objective of me. And what I had to do is I moved the Griffhounds down and put my Canite Shadowstalkers as a screen there. And because he just killed those Shadowstalkers, I thought I was being smart, thought I went for his objective, and I completely fell for the bluff here. I should have left the Griffhounds as the big screen in front of my army, would have taken him a turn, and would have probably prevented him a turn, maybe 2, if I got a nice priority roll off, just to able to save my models that little bit more. In the end, he struck through my lines, he hit a Liberator Blood hard, and in the end, he just finally pushed through to the second one and got to a point where I just wasn't in a position to ever win the game again. This one did go on for a while. He did do some damage, but the mortal wound output, especially from the shooting snakes, really turned the tide. Once those shooting snakes managed to get into what they wanted to get into, they really just did the damage. There's just a ton of mortal wounds that came at this army, and it was a perfect counter to just my 2-up armor save, where they really didn't give a damn about it. Morathi barely killed any models in all instances, and most of the other attacks did nothing. It was really all the mortal wounds that did all the damage, and just couldn't have survived long enough to get the points I needed to win the game, even though I took the majority of the board very early on. I fell for a bluff, I got punished, and that was it for the day 1 games. Sitting on 1 and 2, I was a little bit disappointed with myself that I'd fallen for some bluffs and made some bad plays throughout the games. However, I haven't been playing competitive AOS for a little while. Been mostly playing a lot more friendly sort of AOS as we've been getting our new community built up in my new little game store, but it was alright. 1 and 2. I was hoping to go 3 and 2 by the end of the event, and we'll see how that goes in the next video. Game 4 was against Matt Tester and his Stormcast Eternals, who were also playing in the Stormkeep. They were Anvils of the Heldenhammer instead, and they had a Lord Ordinator, Lord Castellan as his general, a Knight Incantor, Knight Azeroth, a unit of 20 Liberators, 2 units of 10 Liberators, and then he had a unit of 6 Vanguard Raptors and 4 Celestar Ballistas. So this army was similar to mine in some ways. I had the big blocks of Liberators, however it didn't have the battalion for the redeploy, and this really was the main turning point in the game. The game was almost probably decided at, I guess, just the simple list phase. We were playing the Blade's Edge, and because of the 6 objectives, I was just able to literally put my army down onto 4 of the objectives, completely control them, and then I was also able to just jump up my troops, my Shadowstalkers and my Free Good Guard as a screen onto one of the one in the corner, and then keep my backfield one with the Aether Wings in the meantime, and eventually move back my troops onto that, just continuing to get the points. In the first turn, I took all 6. I then chose to go second in the next turn as I won the roll-off, removed the corner objective that my Canite Shadowstalkers were on, then retreated my Free Good Guard back to my home objective, and I got 5 the next turn, and I got 4 the next turn, and it was game over at that point. As I just removed the objectives, my Liberators went on, and he never got through them. Lantern of the Tempest came in clutch because I literally just deployed in my formation that I come in on and did nothing else. The Vanguard Raptors re-rolling their 6s, they effectively did nothing all game. I didn't lose a single Liberator all game in this battle. And I guess it was just a time of where I'm playing an army that did the same thing, but it didn't have the ability to redeploy like I did, and the game was pretty much over at that point. He did try to do some cool things. He was having to try and kill around my stuff to try and take out my characters, and in the end he ended up taking out a few of them. There was a nice big bit of terrain that actually stopped him getting rid of my Lantern of Tempest, as I was able to hide my Veritant from his long strikes, who couldn't move just because of how I'd placed my stuff. Maybe a turn of running, or maybe if he had the Aquila in his army, he could have got into my Veritant at a different point. but it just wasn't to be. His game was over fairly quickly. It was not the nicest game to ever play against Matt. I hope I get to play him again with a much nicer list that's not going to be, I guess, as boring a game as what we had in this one. It was just that case of where, once again, I mentioned that the other similar list, my list is just going to not let them play. It's just not going to have anything done to them. But against the armies that can put out more mortal wounds, it's really going to suffer. So this is an army with very light on mortal wounds. It just couldn't get through anything. It didn't even kill my Griffhound unit. It just didn't have enough damage output to do that. It was trying to sit like I was, but I was just able to get on the objectives first, which really decided the game there and then. Game 5 was against Simon Hall, who was playing Cities of Sigmar and the Greywater Fastness sub-allegiance. It was a really cool list he ran. He had a steam tank there, a Celestial Hurricanum, Rune Lord, Lord Ordinator, 10 Longbeards, 2 other steam tanks that were battle line, 30 Iron Drakes, 5 Pistoliers, and 3 Gyrocopters. He also had Longshon, the Soul Seeker. He came in at 1990 points and 119 wounds. He had no command points in the army. He set himself up as a screen, and well, this was the interesting part about the scenario. I had to go for it, and I probably didn't try hard enough. So with the scenario, because he had 2 behemoths in his army, only 2 because the 2 steam tank battle lines lose that keyword. So he only had 2 behemoths, being the Celestial Hurricanum and the steam tank. He was able to set up and make it so he was going to get 4 points on his first turn. I was also getting 4 points, but I was having to take the center field to do so. And so the game was going to grind to a stalemate, and I had to go on the offensive to try and get the points off him, otherwise he was just going to shoot me on the board. I rerolled 1 charge, failed, spent a command point, and then was worried about getting double turned in reverse, and so I didn't spend a command point on the second unit of Liberators that I probably should have, to try to get at least 1 unit in there to force him to have to deal with 1 unit of Liberators and then go in the other. I didn't, and thus I sort of left myself open to getting shot to pieces, and that is effectively what happened in this game. I did have some tricks and maybe could have brought it back had a unit of Griffhounds made a charge, but they were outside of any range and they failed a 6-inch charge late game, which was devastating. There were a few things in this game, but in the end, the army just really couldn't deal with the high rend output he was able to do, and the shooting and potential double turns that were given during the game just really summed up my day against this. It was a great list to play against, and honestly, it was amazing to see 3 steam tanks on the table, and Simon is a great player and an absolute gent to play. I will say that about all my opponents. I couldn't say anything less about them. They're all fantastic opponents to play, but Simon was particularly great to play against. He was just so meticulous and so precise about everything he was doing. It made the game a ton of fun when he's just like, this does this because I've got this, and then just so meticulous with all his movements. I really thoroughly enjoyed playing him and can't wait to give him another crack. But this was the last game and it ended up in a loss, and this put me in 2 and 3 for the event. Not, I guess, the result I was hoping for. Probably hoping for 3 and 2, but not far off. 2 and 3, got to be happy with that. I finished just below the midline of the tournament, so that was all fun. So, in summary, I guess now let's talk about what happened and what I thought of the list and the army and the event in general. The event, couldn't say anything better about it. It's a really cool event. It's run at an old RSL. For those who don't know what an RSL is, it's a Returned Servicemen's League. It's sort of like, I guess, an old army veterans get-together sort of place. It's lovely. The people that work there have just this amazing little charm about them. The food that we get from the event is like just a home-cooked sort of field meal. On day 1, lunch was like a curry, some pasta bake, rice and salads and pasties, and it was amazing. Day 2, we had much more of like a barbecue style thing with sausage and bread, with a sausage sizzle, some steaks and some chicken and a garlic bread and a whole bunch of other stuff like that. It was amazing. Food was fantastic. Venue's great as always. The bar prices are really cheap. I don't drink, but you know, when cans of Coke are cheap, I'm going for the fact that maybe the rest of the drinks are cheap as well. But it was great. The venue great. Everything about it was great. Mike runs a good ship and a good tournament, and can't say enough about Matt Weiss, who is, I guess, the brains behind the event. While Mike is the figurehead and face, Matt is the one who's running everything, doing all the number crunching and all that sort of stuff, and he does an amazing job and shouldn't be forgotten about by this event. Anyway, the army, it did okay. 2 and 3, that's pretty cool. If I think I had maybe a couple more favourable matchups, it probably could have done a little bit better. It came up against some really hard counters, and maybe this started from the fact that I maybe won my first game very, very big, so it's put me probably in the armies that were really going to hurt me. It was really good though, as I mentioned, versus mid to low tier armies. Against armies like that, it was almost non-game in some of them, especially against the other Stormcast Eternal army. This, I guess, is an issue because it's going to be not good enough to play against those really top tier armies, but it's also just going to be not fun for people to potentially play against when they've got a similar power level army. It sort of crushes its competition in its own sort of tier, but it again just doesn't have really that punch to face some of the higher armies. It potentially could have done well if it got some matchups against the higher tier armies in the game, maybe if it played some of the Slaves to Darkness stuff, or the Ossiarch Bone Reaper armies. It might have stood a bit more of a chance against them, or even the Lumineth Realm Lord armies that finished a little bit higher than me because of my bodies on the table. But it struggled generally with high mortal wound output and shooting. Daughters of Cain was probably the game I was the most out of, and really it showed when they had both range and mortal wound output. It really hurt. For me, though, I think I am done for now with the army in general. I played quite a few games with it now. It's done its job. I don't think there's much more I can do better with the army. I think I've got a pretty good list for this battalion and army in general in this style, and so I want to give something else a crack. For me, this army's going on the shelf for now. It's done its play, and maybe you'll see it on the channel pop up here and now again as we get some more games happening on the channel again. Thank you all for watching the video though, and if you went to SAGT, you're a legend. If I did play you in the game, you're an absolute legend. I'll leave some links down to a couple of channels that are people that I played during the event. I know Simon's got his own channel as well that you can go and follow and have a look at. And I'll also leave some Twitter handles for some great hobby content, because Liam's army in particular looks absolutely amazing. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And also, while you're here on YouTube, why not go check out my featured channel section where there's a bunch of other fantastic Warhammer Age of Sigmar content creators with a bunch of amazing things, from battle reports, painting videos, list videos, and more besides. Also, if you'd like to come chat more with me and other members of our little community on Cinderful Gaming, you can do so by following the link to our Discord server in the description of the video. Lastly, we'd like to give a shout out to everyone who helps support the channel via Patreon or YouTube members. Thank you to James, AJC, JC, Christian Weir, Philip Ward, Soren, Kenny Lowe, Alder and Shot First, Cowspawn, James Crowder, and Andrew Jarvis. Thank you all for supporting the channel. And if you'd like to help support the channel like they do, you can do so by following the links in the description again to either Patreon or YouTube members. Thank you all for watching though. Stay safe, stay well, and most of all, keep fighting that war against the Grey. Ciao for now.